A disabled veteran in a wheelchair sits quietly in a cafe, enduring cruel whispers and mockery from strangers who call her a fake and a burden. They don't know she lost her legs serving her country, or that her son's army unit is about to walk through the door. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Sarah Martinez rolled her wheelchair through the doors of Main Street Café on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. At 45 years old, she had learned to navigate the world with grace despite losing both legs below the knee during her military service in Afghanistan. Her graying hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore a simple blue blouse with comfortable slacks. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd, families, business people and retirees enjoying their meals. Sarah found an empty table by the window and positioned herself comfortably. She had been looking forward to this quiet lunch out. Her son Miguel was stationed nearby with his army unit for training exercises, and she thought it would be nice to get out of the house for a change. The young waitress, Jenny, came over with a bright smile and took her order for coffee and a turkey sandwich. As Sarah waited for her food, she noticed some whispers from nearby tables. Richard Barnes, a loud businessman in an expensive suit, was talking to his colleague at the next table. "Great," he said, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Now we have to watch what we say because someone decided to make a spectacle of themselves." His colleague looked uncomfortable, but Barnes continued. "I'm just saying there are special places for people like that. Why make everyone else uncomfortable?" Sarah heard every word but kept her eyes on her menu. She had dealt with comments like this before, though they never stopped hurting. At another table, two middle-aged women were having their own conversation about her. "I bet she's one of those people milking the system," one said. "Half these disabilities are fake nowadays." The other woman nodded in agreement. "Exactly. My tax dollars paying for her to sit around while real people work for a living." When Jenny brought her coffee, Sarah ordered her sandwich with a polite smile. She tried to focus on the view outside the window and ignore the growing murmur of conversation about her. But Barnes was getting bolder with his comments. "You know what bothers me?" he said loudly to his colleague. "We're supposed to feel sorry for every sob story that rolls through the door. Some of us actually earned our way in life." An elderly man across the room joined in. "Maybe she should order takeout next time. Some people come here to relax, not be reminded of life's problems." A few customers chuckled uncomfortably, while others looked away, not wanting to get involved. Sarah took a deep breath and maintained her composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. The comments grew worse. One of the women said loudly, "Look at her taking up extra space, making everyone walk around. It's inconsiderate." Barnes nodded enthusiastically. "Right? And the waitress will probably spend twice as long dealing with special requests. That affects service for everyone else." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling to her son's contact, "Miguel, my soldier boy," with a photo of him in his dress uniform. Instead of calling, she put the phone away and folded her hands in her lap. The harassment continued to escalate. "These people expect the world to revolve around them," said one woman. "She probably gets more in disability checks than I make working 40 hours a week." Barnes stood up slightly and said, "Exactly. While we're working our butts off, some people just expect handouts for life." Sarah felt a tear roll down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away. A young mother whispered to her husband, asking if they should say something, but he shook his head and told her it wasn't their business. When Jenny brought Sarah's sandwich, she noticed the tension in the air but wasn't sure what to do. Barnes became even more aggressive. "I'm sorry, but this is supposed to be a family restaurant," he announced to the room. "Some of us brought our kids here to have a nice meal, not to be made uncomfortable by situations." He gestured towards Sarah without looking directly at her. An elderly woman joined in, saying, "There are special facilities for people with those kinds of needs. This is a regular restaurant." Sarah took a small bite of her sandwich, trying to focus on eating instead of the cruel words surrounding her. Barnes continued his attack. "And let's be honest, how do we even know it's real? These professional victims have gotten pretty good at working the system." This drew even more stares from other patrons. One of the middle-aged women stood up and approached Sarah's table. "Look, I'm sure you're a nice person," she said, "but this isn't really the place for your situation. There are other options that might be more appropriate." Sarah looked up and met the woman's eyes. "I'm just trying to have lunch, ma'am," she said quietly but firmly. The woman continued, "But you have to understand how it affects other people. My children are asking questions I shouldn't have to answer during a family meal." Barnes came over too. "She's right. This is a private business. They have the right to maintain a certain atmosphere." Just then Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Miguel. "Hey mom. Unit's in town for training. Wanna grab dinner later? Love you." Sarah quickly typed back, "Have a lovely time with your unit, Mijo. I'm fine." She put the phone away and tried to return to her sandwich, but Barnes wasn't finished. "Look, I'm sure the taxpayers are covering your meal anyway," he said, standing over her table. "So why not get it to go? Make everyone's day a little easier?" The entire restaurant fell silent. All eyes were on Sarah and Barnes. Sarah set down her sandwich and looked up at Barnes with quiet dignity. "I served my country for 12 years, sir," she said calmly. "I lost my legs in Afghanistan when my convoy hit an IED while delivering supplies to a forward operating base. I earned the right to eat lunch wherever I choose." The silence in the restaurant was complete. Barnes was caught off guard but doubled down on his position. "Well, look, we all appreciate the military, but that doesn't mean." Sarah sat up straighter in her wheelchair. "It doesn't mean what, sir? That I've earned the right to exist in public? That my sacrifice matters? That my son, who's currently serving his second deployment, might be proud to have a mother who served before him?" The woman who had approached her table tried to backtrack. "We didn't know." Sarah's voice remained steady but grew stronger. "You didn't need to know about my service. You needed to treat another human being with basic decency. But since you brought it up, let me tell you what happened that day in Afghanistan." The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. "I was a supply sergeant," Sarah continued. "My job was to make sure soldiers had food, water, ammunition, and medical supplies. On March 15, 2018, our convoy was bringing emergency medical supplies to troops under fire at a forward operating base. We knew it was dangerous, but those soldiers needed those supplies to save lives. The IED blast killed 2 of my fellow soldiers instantly and left me with injuries that required both my legs to be amputated." Barnes shifted uncomfortably, no longer meeting her eyes. "I spent 14 months in military hospitals, learning to walk again, learning to drive again, learning to live again. And not once during that time did I think I was asking for handouts or taking up too much space. I thought I was recovering so I could continue contributing to society." Her voice never wavered, though tears ran down her cheeks. "My son Miguel enlisted 2 years after my injury," Sarah continued. "He said he wanted to serve because he saw what sacrifice looked like. He's currently a staff sergeant with the 82nd Airborne Division. He served 2 tours in Iraq and is preparing for his 3rd deployment. When people like you make comments about veterans being burdens on society, you're talking about people who volunteered to risk everything so you could sit in cafes and complain about your lunch being interrupted." The middle-aged woman sat down heavily in her chair, her face red with shame. Other patrons stared at their plates, suddenly finding their food very interesting. Barnes cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, we didn't mean. I mean, obviously if you're really a veteran." Sarah cut him off. "If I'm really a veteran? Sir, would you like to see my DD-214? My Purple Heart citation? The photos from Walter Reed Medical Center?" Before Barnes could respond, the cafe door chimed as it opened. Every head turned to see Miguel Martinez, 24, entering in his Army combat uniform. He was followed by another soldier, then another, until 12 members of his unit filed into the small cafe. They moved with military precision, taking positions around Sarah's table without saying a word. Miguel approached his mother's table and stood at attention. "Ma'am," he said formally, "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez reporting. We received word that someone was showing disrespect to a decorated combat veteran." Sarah looked up at her son in surprise. "Miguel, how did you?" He smiled slightly. "Jenny, the waitress, is my high school friend. She texted when she saw what was happening." The other soldiers remained at attention around the cafe. There was Sergeant First Class Johnson, a tall African-American man with kind eyes. Specialist Rodriguez, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 20. Corporal Thompson, a stocky redhead with multiple deployment patches. All of them wore their uniforms with pride, their ribbons and badges telling stories of service and sacrifice. Miguel turned to address the restaurant. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my mother, retired Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez. She served our country with distinction for 12 years. She was awarded the Purple Heart, the Combat Action Badge, and the Bronze Star for her service in Afghanistan. She lost her legs while ensuring that soldiers in combat had the supplies they needed to complete their mission and return home safely." The silence in the cafe was profound. Barnes had gone pale and was slowly backing toward his table. The middle-aged women were staring at their hands. Other patrons who had remained silent during the harassment now looked ashamed of their inaction. Sergeant First Class Johnson stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, "my name is Sergeant First Class Robert Johnson. I served in Afghanistan in 2019. There's a very good chance that supplies your unit delivered saved lives in my company. It's an honor to meet you." He rendered a perfect military salute, which Sarah returned from her wheelchair. One by one, the other soldiers introduced themselves and paid their respects. Specialist Rodriguez spoke about her own mother, who had served in Iraq. Corporal Thompson talked about the importance of the logistics units that kept combat soldiers supplied and alive. Each soldier's words carried the weight of genuine respect and understanding. Miguel placed his hand gently on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, we were planning to grab lunch anyway after our training exercise. Would you mind if we joined you?" Sarah smiled, her eyes bright with tears, but these were tears of pride, not pain. "I would be honored," she said. The soldiers began pushing tables together to accommodate their group. Jenny, the waitress, hurried over with menus and water glasses, her own eyes misty. "Thank you," she whispered to Miguel as she passed. "I didn't know what to do." Miguel nodded. "You did the right thing by reaching out." As the soldiers settled in around Sarah, the atmosphere in the cafe completely transformed. Other patrons began to approach, offering apologies and thanks for Sarah's service. An elderly veteran from the Korean War came over to shake her hand and share his own story. Children who had been curious about Sarah's wheelchair now saw her surrounded by soldiers and understood that she was someone very special. Barnes approached hesitantly, his colleague trailing behind him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you a tremendous apology. I spoke out of ignorance and cruelty. There's no excuse for my behavior." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "Apology accepted, sir. But I hope you'll remember this moment the next time you see someone who looks different from you. You never know what battles they've fought or what sacrifices they've made." The middle-aged woman who had told Sarah she should eat elsewhere also came over. "I'm ashamed of myself," she said, tears streaming down her face. "My own father served in Vietnam and I know how hard it was for him when he came home. I should have known better. I should have said something to defend you." Sarah reached out and took the woman's hand. "The important thing is that you recognize it now. We all have opportunities to choose kindness over cruelty. Today can be the day you start choosing differently." As the soldiers enjoyed their lunch, they shared stories of their own service and deployment experiences. Miguel talked about how his mother's example had inspired him to join the military. "She never complained about her injuries," he said. "She never asked for pity or special treatment. She just adapted and kept serving in new ways. She volunteers at the VA hospital, she mentors young veterans transitioning to civilian life, and she raised a son who's proud to wear the uniform." Sergeant First Class Johnson added, "What happened here today is exactly why we serve. We fight for the right of every American to be treated with dignity and respect, especially those who have already given so much for their country." The other soldiers nodded in agreement. Specialist Rodriguez said, "My drill sergeant always told us that we're not just soldiers, we're guardians of American values. Today we got to live up to that responsibility." As the meal continued, other patrons began to join the conversation. The young mother who had earlier asked her husband if they should intervene came over with her children. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up earlier," she told Sarah. "I was teaching my children the wrong lesson by staying silent. They need to learn to stand up for what's right." Sarah smiled at the children. "It's never too late to do the right thing," she told them. "Your mother is very brave for apologizing." The elderly man who had suggested Sarah should order takeout approached with tears in his eyes. "My son is serving in the Navy," he said. "If someone treated my wife the way I saw you being treated today, I'd be devastated. I'm sorry I added to your pain instead of defending you." Sarah reached out and shook his hand. "Thank you for your son's service," she said. "And thank you for your apology. It means more than you know." By the time lunch was finished, the entire cafe had been transformed. What started as a hostile environment filled with prejudice and ignorance had become a gathering of Americans united in respect for service and sacrifice. Patrons who had never spoken to each other before were sharing stories and exchanging contact information. Several people asked for information about volunteering at the VA hospital where Sarah worked. As the soldiers prepared to leave, they formed up in two lines leading from Sarah's table to the door, a gesture of honor typically reserved for military ceremonies. Sarah wheeled between the lines as each soldier saluted. Other patrons in the cafe stood and applauded, many with tears in their eyes. Miguel walked beside his mother's wheelchair as they headed toward the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I'm proud of how you handled it." Sarah looked up at her son with love and pride. Miguel, I faced enemy fire and IED explosions. A few ignorant comments in a cafe aren't going to break me. But seeing you and your unit stand up for what's right, that's what makes all the sacrifices worthwhile. As they reached the door, Jenny the waitress caught up with them. Mrs. Martinez, she said, your lunch is on the house today, and I want you to know that you're welcome here anytime. I'll make sure of it. Sarah smiled warmly. Thank you, dear. But I insist on paying. I'm not looking for special treatment, just equal treatment. Outside the cafe, the soldiers gathered around Sarah one more time. Sergeant First Class Johnson spoke for the group. Ma'am, it's been an honor to meet you and to stand with you today. You represent the best of what it means to be both a soldier and an American. We're proud to serve in the same army that you served in. Sarah wiped away tears of pride and gratitude. Thank you all. You've reminded me why I was proud to wear the uniform, and why I'm proud that my son wears it now. As the soldiers dispersed to return to their training, Miguel lingered with his mother. Are you okay, Mom? Really okay? Sarah nodded firmly. I'm more than okay, Mijo. I'm proud. Proud of you, proud of your fellow soldiers, and proud to be an American in a country where people can learn from their mistakes and choose to do better. Miguel hugged his mother tightly. I love you, Mom. And I'm proud to be your son. Sarah smiled through her tears. I love you too. Now go back to your training and make me even prouder. As Miguel rejoined his unit, Sarah sat for a moment in the afternoon sun, reflecting on the day's events. What had started as a painful encounter with ignorance and prejudice had ended as a powerful reminder of the values that make America strong: honor, respect, service, and the willingness to stand up for what's right. Sarah knew that the people in that cafe would remember this day for the rest of their lives, and perhaps they would think twice before judging others by their appearance or circumstances. As Sarah headed home, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because she had been defended or honored, but because a group of young soldiers had demonstrated the values she had tried to instill in her son. They had shown courage, compassion, and commitment to protecting those who had already given so much in service to their country. The next day, Sarah received calls from several people who had been in the cafe. The young mother wanted to arrange for her children to visit the VA hospital to learn more about veterans' experiences. The elderly man asked if his Navy son could meet Sarah when he returned from deployment. Even Barnes called to ask if he could make a donation to a veterans organization in Sarah's honor. But the call that meant the most came from Jenny, the waitress. Mrs. Martinez, she said, I wanted you to know that what happened yesterday has changed how I see things. I'm going to college to become a social worker, and I want to specialize in helping veterans. Seeing how you handled that situation with such grace and dignity inspired me to want to serve too, just in a different way. Sarah smiled as she hung up the phone. This was why she had served, why her son continued to serve, and why she would never stop serving in whatever capacity she could. It wasn't about glory or recognition, it was about making the world a little bit better, one person at a time. That evening, as Sarah looked at the photos of her and Miguel in their military uniforms that hung on her living room wall, she felt a deep sense of peace. The day had reminded her that while there would always be people who judged others unfairly, there would also always be those willing to stand up for what's right. And sometimes, that makes all the difference in the world.